Formally, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our latest online talk. And I must say, I am absolutely delighted this evening to have Julia Hailes joining us. Julia, for those of you who don't know Julia, and those many of you that do have probably heard of Julia, Julia is a real green environmental pioneer. Actually, she was pushing environmental choices and green consumerism long before most of us had even thought about it, I must say. And I've got Julia's book here, actually, The Green Consumer Guide, which was published in 1988, Julia?
Yep, that's right, 1988.
And sold over 1 million copies, I believe.
Yep, it did.
And
not in the UK.
So, and I looked through it again recently, and it's still very, very relevant, actually. And I was just saying to Julia, I actually referenced her book quite a lot in my environment degree on various assignments when I was at university. So it's full of really useful information still. So if you can get hold of a copy, I expect you can probably still find them on Amazon shops and things. Well worth getting hold of and still extremely relevant. So absolutely delighted, Joe. So what was your motivation, Julia, early on in pushing green consumerism?
Well, what we wanted to do when we came up with the Green Consumer Guide is we wanted to just show everybody that they were having an impact on the environment every single day through the choices that they were making in terms of what you were doing and what you were buying. And that was not only because of the individual choice that you were making, but it was also because of the message that you were sending back to the businesses who were making the products or selling the products. So that was a real key driver for us. And then we ended up advising those businesses in how they could become greener and better. And we then were able to say, well, there are lots of people out there who really care about this. Look at the number of people who bought our book.
And you said within a year or so of your book being published and you talking to supermarkets, most of them had taken on a sustainability advisor or some such thing?
Yeah, so basically when I was researching for the Green Consumer Guide, I called all the supermarkets and asked them about what they were doing environmentally, and they just had not a clue what I was talking about because it just wasn't on their radar at all. But because the Green Consumer Guide came out, it had 11 print runs in the first few weeks, and it just went completely mad. And we had Green Consumer Week and all sorts of activity around it, lots of television and radio, things like that. They were very much aware of it. So by the time I rang them up to research the next book, the supermarket guide, the Green Supermarket Guide, I rang them up again and we sent them a 99-page questionnaire. But by that time, every single supermarket had actually employed an environmental advisor. So it was really interesting because they were picking up the message that people were concerned and that they needed to do something, and they brought in a lot of changes.
Absolutely wonderful, and a lot of stuff in there we now take for read, as it were.
Yes, well, I think obviously the exciting thing is that most businesses now do have environmental departments. They're aware about those things. Not quite so exciting is that there's just been so much terrible things are happening, and that in a way that's what behind the talk I'm giving today, because whereas we were focusing on the concept of sustainability, keeping things going and making sure that we could go on living in the same way, now we have to really start focusing on seeing if we can put things back, because as a species we have been so incredibly destructive, and we've got to try and bring back, because the decline in all sorts of species and habitats and things is absolutely dreadful.
Indeed, and there's something for us all to do with regard to that, isn't there? So you're still promoting sustainable lifestyles?
I'm very much promoting that, really people being aware on all fronts about what they personally can do. And obviously in this respect, I've really taken it into the garden, and I'm still learning a huge amount. I'm not an ecologist, but it's really fun finding out more, and I'll be really interested on some of the views of the people here on some of the issues that I raise.
Indeed. And one of the things I've been saying a lot is, lots of us are thinking globally, as we should be, but wondering what we can do to act locally, really. What do we do locally? And so you've turned your attention to how we can rewild gardens and make a difference on our own patch. And ultimately, that's all most of us can do, isn't it? Is sort our own patch out. So without further ado, Julia, please, I'm excited to hear what you've got to say.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Here we are. Get this. Okay, is that working for everyone?
Perfect.
Now where's my play button? Well, it disappeared.
Right, we can see your first slide, okay?
Resume share. Let me see if I go. No. So strangely, I can't see my all our things. I can't see the share button to go on to the next, not the share button, the forward button.
I think if you just press your right arrow, it should do that.
It's done it. Okay, perfect. No, it's not really doing that. Oh, I know, it's on my previous.
I think if you just use the left and right arrows, Julia, I think you should be good.
I don't have any left and right arrows.
On your keyboard?
On my keyboard I do, but it's not working.
Oh.
So it's quite weird, but I've got. Okay, let me just, I'm just gonna. Okay, I'll try like this, see if it works, and I think probably as I go along it's going to get easier. Okay, so my wonderful mother, and this is a picture of her various stages in her life, died last year, and she taught me a lot of things which have been incredibly valuable. One of the things was to say yes as much as possible, which is probably one of the reasons why I'm speaking here today, because I generally say yes if people ask me to do things. But I have to say that she was not the most brilliant role model in the garden. And she would tell me that her garden was nearly organic, as she liberally sprinkled slug pellets around the place, and weed killer with abandon along all the paths, for example, in the vegetable garden. So her nearly organic was not quite as it might be. And she was also incredibly good with catching moles. So she put mole traps all over the garden. And I have to admit that when I first came to Hook, I put down mole traps and got a mole man to come along. But of course, I've now learned that moles are absolutely wonderful, and that we should be not trying to kill them, but embracing them, and embrace those little hummocks all around the garden. Very good for turning over the earth, very good for those the mole rand if you want a lovely sort of friable earth to pot your plants in. Absolutely fantastic. So we don't want to be following her example in that respect. And we used to have great fun putting out all these pots for wasps. I don't know how many other people have got into that, but definitely not something that we should be doing. Any more. Wasps are really valuable pollinators, and they're also quite good at killing off some of the other predators on one's plants and things. So we should be embracing them. And I've recently been slightly tested on this, because we put up these swift boxes in our garden, and like two other bird boxes that we've got, they've been colonized by bees. But at first I thought they were wasps, and someone came along and said, oh, you've got wasps and they're all coming into the house and the things. And then I thought to myself, well, you know, I should be embracing these wasps rather than and getting rid of them. So I decided that we'd just leave them there and see see what happens. As it turned out, they're bees. And I quite like people to have a look at this slide, because at the end somebody's going to be able to tell me what type of bees that they are. So if you could have a look and see what you think. That's that one. Now, the other thing my mother did was use masses of peat. She was always buying sacks of peat and sprinkling them all over the flower beds. Every single year, they seem to be piled high with peat. But peat is the most terrible thing to use in your garden. It's an absolute no-no. And this is just one of the statistics which just give you the idea about how valuable the peat bogs are. They occupy only 3% of the land in the world, but they contain 25% of soil carbon, and twice as much as the world's forests, all the world's forests all put together. So, so we have to really think very carefully about that. And at the moment, using my, green consumer powers, I go around, talk to garden centres and ask them about it. Sadly, most garden centres are still selling peat in one fashion or form. A lot of them have started moving away from selling seeds in sacks, but not all of them. And they most of them will be selling plants which are potted in peat. Groves, for example, don't sell them their own ones potted in peat, but they still sell ones which are potted by other people in peat. And most of them, those little plug plants, they will be using peat. And it's just completely ridiculous. However, the Wildlife Trust have produced a guide about going peat free. So have a look, and maybe you'll put this in the chat so that people can have a link and find out more about it. Government legislation has been incredibly poor about this. They've set sort of voluntary targets which are just nowhere near being met. And then they keep sort of, pulling it back. At the moment, they've got it that bag peat should be banned by the end of 2024, horticultural peat growing plants in 2027, and plug plants and edible mushrooms not until 2030. Well, I just think that is just not good enough. It's the most incredibly valuable resource, and we should be keeping it in the ground, not only because of the carbon benefits, but also because of the unique wildlife and flooding and all sorts of marvelous things that it does. Also, when I came to Hook, obviously I've never used peat because I've known about that for a long time. And the other area where I was quite good right from the beginning was embracing organic. This is my wonderful gardener, Rachel Moss, who's been really brilliant at the whole sort of wilding thing. And she's created this is actually our vegetable garden in full summer mode, and you can see that it looks as if it's quite difficult to find any vegetables in there, but they are there, but they're just surrounded so much companion planting that you have to hunt for the vegetables in the garden. But one thing I have used poison on is Japanese knotweed. I don't know if I would now, but it does seem to be a very intractable problem, and I'd be really interested to hear if anyone's got solutions that don't involve any sort of herbicide. So, of course, the queen of wilding, most of you will have heard of Isabella Tree. And last year, I was lucky enough to visit Knepp and have lunch with her, which was absolutely fantastic. And the thing that really struck me about Knepp, where she has this very large estate, where she's wilded the whole thing and taken away fences and let the animals roam free, was how quickly the different species came back. And that for me is absolutely amazing, because how do the butterflies find, how do they find Knepp? How does the turtle dove find that they've got this marvelous area of land? It's really almost a miracle, really. And I suppose on a mini scale, I've started finding that at my home in Dorset, because suddenly we're seeing things that were well, I don't think were there when we arrived, and we just had rather boring and unexciting fields when we arrived. But there's a lot of debate about wilding, and one of the debates that Isabella Tree has set off is that people think rewilding is only on really, really, really big estates, and it only counts if it's like that. And I think that part of my message is it's not just about that. It's something that everybody can do, however big a scale of garden or land that you have. I met someone the other day, and they had a very small patch in the centre of Bristol, and they still had managed to bring in lots of different species within that urban area. Now you can see that Isabella Tree was cuddling a beaver, and beavers are one of the controversial things about wilding. In fact, many people are incredibly fearful about what it might mean for them, and whether they're munching at the trees. I think some people think they eat fish, but of course they don't. But however, beavers are a keystone species, and I know the Dorset Wildlife Trust have got some beavers that they've introduced too. Currently, they all have to be enclosed in fences because it's still a bit of an experiment in terms of what they do, but they're really valuable in terms of the ecosystem. They change the way the rivers flow, and they change the whole dynamic, and they end up bringing back more different species. And the Dorset beavers have been recorded that they were on the run, and this was the sort of headline in the newspaper in January 2023, where they seem to have managed to escape, which was quite exciting. But I'm hoping that they don't have to stay behind fences for much longer, that the government will move that on. So our idea for wilding at Hook was twofold. We wanted to create a landscape that had lots and lots of suitable habitat for all sorts of species, but we also wanted it to be rather, you know, wonderful and exciting and fun to look at. And so we did a whole range of things. We dug actually about 10 different ponds. This one is actually the biggest one. It's we can swim in it, and it's got masses. It immediately filled up with newts, which was, you know, another way. How did they find our marvelous ponds? Who knows? But anyway, they swarmed into this pond, and then we actually diverted the pond so that they sort of trickled all the way down the hill and went round. So we created out of a rather boring field with sort of a slightly marshy ground into a wonderful water meadow. And we have not only the newts but frogs, and we've also put in a hibernaculum, which some of you will know is an area where the reptiles can hibernate in the winter. The only trouble with it is that we've done it beautifully, all as advised to do, and there's a little sort of hole going in, but of course it's sort of slightly buried under the ground, and you've no idea whether there's anybody resident in it. And I'm not sure we will ever know. We just have to hope that they're in there. And this was part of our wanting it to look nice. So these are our chicken houses, and we put those chicken houses on the top of a little hummock so that we could see the chickens, and the fence was sort of down below. So they're very, very much on display in their marvelous new habitat. And you can see on the right hand side that that's the sort of egg-like gate that we had. In fact, I was trying to get everything to look a bit like an egg, but that didn't quite work. But one of the other controversial things about wilding, somebody said to me when I said that that's what we were doing, they said, well, why don't you just let all the docks and the nettles and the creeping thistle, why don't you just let them all go? That's proper wilding. And of course, in some ways that's the case, but they really like to colonize on sort of nutrient-rich ground. And also they tend to sort of, somebody described them as a sort of bully species. They slightly sort of bully the other species out of existence. So part of our wilding is spending quite a lot of time trying to you know, cut the docks or dig up the thistles. We have them all over the place, and we have them in different areas where the thistles abound or the nettles abound and whatever. But in our sort of main bit of the area, we're trying to sort of get rid of them so that we really can see more of the other types of wildflies, and that is a constant battle, I have to say. So in the first year, and this is actually also one of the exciting things, we really started in 2020 with our main wilding project, and that's when we had the sort of bulldozers coming in to get it right. But when we started, you have to sow the wildflower meadow that we'd taken the topsoil off. We had to sow it with lots of annuals to come through, because the perennials take a bit longer to take hold. So the second year, it was the perennials turned, but the first year we got all these lovely cornflowers and poppies and oxeye daisies, which is I think, you know, rather lovely. And then the next year, the sort of yellow background that you see in one of my pictures. Oh yes, here we are, the yellow background, and then this marvelous blue plant, which some of you will know, is Viper's. Oh God, I've had a thing. Viper's bugloss. I think it looks like a delphinium, but you know, even better because it's a marvelous wildflower, and that's it last year in our meadow. This year, our meadow is going to look very different again, because some of these things are biannuals, and so they're not going to be here this year, and something else is going to come through. So each year it's a bit of a surprise, particularly for me, who's very ignorant about these things. So here is an example that if you want to do wilding in a sort of a biggish area, or sort of, you know, the whole of your lawn or whatever, there seem to be 3 sort of main ways to do it, or 4. So the first one is, I think, what these people are doing, where they just basically put something like plastic or carpet or something like that, and they smother all the stuff that's in the ground, and they have to keep that down for quite a while, and then they sow it with the wildflowers. A lot of people actually poison the ground with Roundup and get rid of all the vegetation by doing that and bringing it on. Personally, I'm rather horrified by that, but it seems to be something that quite a few people do. And then the next way is what we did, which was stripping off the topsoil, which I was also very reluctant to do at the beginning, because it felt sort of wrong taking fertile soil away from the ground. And in some ways it's a bit of a misnomer saying it's fertile, because replacing it with the less fertile soil actually created far more biodiversity, which is, you know, something that seems to be a bit of a conflict. And what we did is we used that earth to make all sorts of mounds all over the place and colonize it with different types of wildflowers and trees and that type of thing. So we just made our area of land much more diverse. And then the final way of doing it is just to wait for a very long time, where you you mow it and put the seeds down and put it up, and eventually you'll get more and more sort of wildflowers coming through. And certainly I'm finding that, because we're doing that quite a lot with our lawns. I'm going to come to lawns later on. So next bit is about insects, and I have to say that I've become absolutely fascinated by insects, and wherever I go, if I see them, I'm trying to take nice pictures of them, it's quite difficult because obviously lots of them move very fast, but some of them don't. And I got a really gorgeous picture of a Maybug earlier this week, which I can't show you because I haven't put it up here. But at Hook we have a lovely team of people locally who come in every week to monitor the butterflies that they see, and we've now been doing this for 3 years, and we report it to the butterfly conservation group. And that's, you know, that's really nice, because we'll be able to tell how the seasons have changed, but also how our wilding is maybe affecting the butterfly population. And to a lesser extent, we have some bee monitoring going on. But last year, they said that they didn't really like coming on a sunny day because there were so many bees, it was just completely impossible to count them. And it's wonderful, it's just completely rich of bees, and I'm trying to learn about the different types, of which there are quite a few. So now here's a slide that I'm rather proud of, because these are all the all insects that I took photos of last year at Hook. And you know, look how colourful and marvellous that is in terms of the thing. So I'm now going to do a 2023 one and see what different ones I can produce for that. And at our wilding weekend, which I'll tell you about later, I'm going to produce a postcard like this. So I hope there are lots of other people who appreciate beautiful and lovely insects. Now, one of the things that really got me going about insects was I went to hear a speech by David Goulson. He actually was speaking in Bridport, and he's written this book, Silent Earth: Averting the Insect Apocalypse. And it is totally shocking to hear what he's identified. And he's been a sort of insect fanatic all his life, and he's incredibly knowledgeable. He shows all the different ways in which we are killing them off, and how dramatic it is, the decline in insects and things. And I think most of people will be aware that if you were looking at your windscreen in the 1960s or the 1970s, the windscreen of your car, it would be liberally splattered with insects, and today there are none. And that's because there has been a very, very significant decline in insects. And of course, the correlation of that is a decline in birds and other animals that like to eat the insects, and of course a decline in pollination and all sorts of things. So this is something that we really have got to reverse. And if we do manage to get many more people wilding in their gardens, hopefully we'll be able to bring some of the insects back. So one of the things that we're doing, this is my wonderful husband, Jamie, and Bertie on the left, and he helped to build this insect house. We've got these little holes. I'm not sure that all the holes are the right size, so I'm going to have to review that. But the idea is that the insects go and make their little nests in those holes, and then we've got other ones, lots of spiders around there and things. So I'm sort of waiting to see what species decide to come and colonize that. And we've also got stone mounds all over the garden, everything to encourage more of these marvelous things.
Oh, that'll be good.
Okay, coming to grasslands. Now, grasslands is actually the sort of whole management of grass is, I realise, one of the most challenging things, certainly for us, in terms of when to mow, what to mow, if to mow, and all the different bits. But it's also one of the most sort of exciting things, because actually the more you look, the more you see. And what we've discovered is there are lots and lots of different types of grass in there. And I'm just going to, in relation to this side, to show you that what we decided to do, and this is like all over, is that we're just doing mown paths through our grasslands. And it's completely changed it. And I have to say that both Jamie and I both started off being quite keen sort of mowing enthusiasts with sort of, you know, getting our orchards down. And I used to love sailing around on the mower and getting it to that nice, you know, I never was someone who would take away, you know, the daisies and the moss and all that type of thing, but I did quite like having the short grass. But now I realise what I've been missing, because mowing paths through your grass and seeing all the different types that are there is actually far more exciting than you could possibly imagine. And this is just a photo. I went out and took a few photos yesterday or the day before, so I could put it up and show you just some of the different grass things that we've got around Hook. And I was particularly pleased to have caught this lovely damselfly on the buttercup on our lawn. And that's the thing, is that, you know, I start looking in the grass and there are all these different insects. They're loving it. They're really hopping up and down with enthusiasm about our new approach to our grasslands. And if you look on the top right hand side of the screen, you'll see that that is just very fine grass. And one of the things I've learned is, if you manage to get that fine grass, it's really good because it grows much slower than the sort of thick coarse grass. So it's very compatible with wildflowers, and it doesn't sort of completely take over. Although I've managed to get some of it, I still haven't completely worked out how to get it. So it's sort of, you know, it's evolved just by virtue of whatever it is that we've done, but I'm not sort of sure if I went out to try and get it, if I'd managed to do the right thing. And then this middle one at the top is just from what used to be entirely 100% a sort of grass lawn, and just a couple of years of sort of doing something a bit different, and look at all the different things that are coming in there. So I think that's really exciting. And then on our lawn, you'll see on the left hand side of this that, you know, a few weeks ago, before we went off on holiday, that lawn was just completely covered in dandelion. And when I was sailing around on my mowing days, I used to be blipping off the dandelions and thinking of them as weeds. Now I've learned that they're early pollinators for bees. They love them because they're a lovely rich nectar source for them. So we've just decided that we love the dandelions now, and I've changed my whole view about it. And you can see this is our front lawn that used to be very tidy, and now is just, you know, lovely mown paths. So of course, one of the things, there are lots of organisations now, or lots of things promoting the idea of no mow May. So I hope that people are really thinking about that in their garden, because if you don't mow your lawn in your lawn, you will get all sorts, you know, obviously your grass will grow and things, but you'll get all sorts of different insects. And May is the time when they really love to come. So it's quite a good idea to maybe do an early mow and then be able to leave the grass in May. And I have to say that I'm a little bit of a hypocrite, because I have been mowing our paths in May. So I feel that I should be But it just happened that I hurt my back very early in the year when I should have been doing it. And then I went on holiday at this rather key time. So I've had to slightly break my own rules and do the path. And then I sort of wince because I suddenly see that I've, you know, run over some little insect or something and things, because I've become a bit mad about it. And also all the different flowers that are going up. So all my paths are very wonky. One, because I actually don't like straight lines, but also because I'm always trying to avoid some rather nice thing. So, you know, you can see where my mower has been diverted. Here we are. Oh, yes. And then the next slide shows you. So this is a field. Now you see this, the photo in the middle with the dog in is what that field looked like about 3 years ago. It had been sort of used for hay, and it was just basically a field in the middle of hopefully rather a nice hedge. But we've then, you know, let it go, let the grasses grow, and this one really is a truly wild field because we haven't actually mown it at all since 2020. I think we've probably got to do a bit of cutting to sort of keep the trees back, because we want to keep it as a meadow. And the main reason we want to keep it as a meadow is because we think of it like a sort of larder for birds of prey. And because they will come down and swoop down and get all the little voles and other mammals that like to nest in the grass. Now, the other thing that I've changed my mind about, and hopefully many of you will too, is about ragwort. Because there's an awful lot of scare stories about ragwort and how it's terribly bad for cows and it might poison them. So I thought this was a very good slide to show you, because the cows are perfectly happy, and horses, in fields and fields of ragwort. The problem is if you have hay which contains ragwort and you give them to the cows and the horses, and then they do become poisonous. But if you're not making hay, there is absolutely no reason to eliminate ragwort, and there are lots of very good reasons why you should embrace it, because ragwort has all these different species of insects that it supports, and it's really one rather wonderful thing. And actually, I have to admit, I showed you a picture of my marvelous gardener, Rachel, and I used to be really encouraging her to pull up the ragwort, and she would just surreptitiously ignore me. And I didn't really know why she was doing it, but then I learned all about how marvelous it is. So now, of course, we're in tune on the ragwort. I had actually a local farmer come in, and he looked at the ragwort and he said that we should cut it, burn it, and just do everything we could as if it was sort of like going to sort of leap on top of us and do terrible things. And that brings me to my next subject, which is bonfires. And I'm actually very anti-bonfires for garden waste. I think we should be much more creative about all the different things that we should be doing, like creating dead hedges, putting our stuff in compost, filling up the old hedge species. And there are 3 reasons why I'm against bonfires. One is the carbon emissions. Secondly, it's very polluting in terms of the, you know, all the various emissions. But most importantly, I think for me, is that they also, all that dead wood and things that you put in a bonfire, often there are little grubs and things like that, lots of insects which are nesting in there or hibernating in there or doing something, and so burning them is not a great thing to do. And it just feels like very wasteful. Certainly from my environmental hat on, the idea of burning something and not using the energy is something that I feel, you know, quite uncomfortable with. So that brings it in. But I know that it's very, very controversial, and I hope no one's going to walk out of my speech because of what I've said about bonfires, because I actually went to a supper party last night, and I was telling the person I was sitting next to about why I was really against bonfires. And he was quite receptive to listening to it. But it turned out that the person opposite got really angry, and she actually got up out of her seat and walked out of the room and said, I am really, really angry. And I had to go and you know, apologize and calm down, because she was just angry about the fact that I was saying I didn't like bonfires. And I think it's because people are, there's a sort of, they're just wedded to the idea. It's something we've always done. It's another thing my mother did with great abandon, love bonfires. And it's very difficult for us to change our ways. But I believe that we're in such a crisis environmentally that we do have to do quite a lot of things that might make us feel a little bit uncomfortable. So, coming to the end, I wanted to tell you about our Wilding weekend here at my home in Hook, and we're encouraging people to come. It's through the National Garden Scheme, and so they get all the money from the tickets, and then people can come. And what we've done is we've got all sorts of stalls, and have I got that as my, yes. Oh, no, I'll come to the stalls later, but we've got all sorts of things going on, talks and food and everything. And as well as the National Garden Scheme, we're also supporting, Clippertees is our sponsor for the Wilding weekend, which is absolutely brilliant. So we're having Clippertees tea and coffee for people, and all the money that they make is being donated to this organisation. It's called Operation Future Hope. And the main focus is for rewilding of schools. So they've done a number of initiatives actually going in and rewilding the schools. They've also done this manual, which you can see on the bottom right, the rewilding manual for schools. And they've done set up a course, a nature and rewilding apprenticeship course, which they're getting school children to do, trying to get it so that all the children in the school do it, to just get them to be more aware about nature, more aware about the value of nature. And if you think about school grounds, most of them are absolutely appalling. They're ecological deserts, you know, they're sprayed and they're cut. And apart from the fact that it's terrible for wildlife, it also costs them more to do all these unpleasant things. And so Operation Future Hope is saying, well, there's a different way of doing it. You can actually have lovely wildflower banks, and children, instead of growing up in these dreadful environments, can actually grow up with lovely, you know, wildflowers and understanding about the value of nature and how important it's going to be for their future. And so I'm actually launching at the Wilding weekend a crowdfunding campaign for Operation Future Hope, so they can start expanding their courses and their rewilding of schools right across the country, hopefully initially to at least 10% of schools in the country. So I hope that you'll be thinking of supporting that, and obviously coming to the weekend. And then this is just some of the different people who will be speaking or doing tours or doing things. One of the things you'll see in the middle there's the Dorset Bat Group, and we've actually got a moth and bat tour on the Saturday night. And so we're doing sort of supper, and then you can go around and have a look at the moths and bats, and that's being run by Steve Masters on the bat side and Adam Gale on the moths, because we do trappings and moths, which we then show on the days of the Wilding weekend, so people can actually see some of the moths that we've caught the night before. And then we also have a stall from the Bumblebee Conservation Society and this marvelous organization on the bottom right, Bee Happy Plants and Seeds, and they really have a huge array of marvelous plants, and they really know about which ones are good for bees. And here we are, and you can have lunch outside, and we have really delicious vegetarian lunch cooked by someone called Claire Wellman, who's from Feast, and she used to have a restaurant in Ilminster called Feast, and she now does Feast in the Field, I think it's called. The things, and then I've got this is telling you about the bat tour, but this stone structure in the middle is what we call our bat egg. And we made it because when we were redoing our the property, we found that under the yard were all these sort of waste stones, which we just had in piles. And we thought we wanted to do something. So we decided to make this dry stone egg. And on the other side, the side that you can't see, is a hole, and as an entrance for the bats. And then inside is an upper cave and a lower cave for the bats. Apparently they like the upper cave in the winter and the lower cave in the summer, and it's the lesser and greater horseshoe bat that might like it inside there, but also you can got other little bats who might nestle in between the stones. So we're hoping that happens. Haven't seen any yet, but Steve Masters, who's going to be running the bat tour, says that he has seen some droppings, so I think they've at least been to investigate. I'm not sure what they could possibly not like. So finally, I'd just like to say that I started talking about my mum and all the terrible things that she did in the garden, and that she wasn't the best environmentalist. But I think that the point that I have to make is that my mother's generation didn't know about the problems that she was creating, but now we do know about them, and there really is no excuse for us to go on doing the things that are so destructive. We just cannot continue to be sort of tinkering around the edges and letting all our grass be sort of mown and poisoned and killing off all the insects and things. So we really need to embrace wilding. Let's just go wild about wilding. And here is my final slide to just show you, come to our wilding weekend. You can find out more on my website about it. I've got to put a little update on there, but there is something already. So if you go on there, you'll be able to find all the information you need about coming. So I've stopped sharing. I don't know if that's good.
Sorry, I was muted for a second there. Thank you very much, Julia. That was absolutely fascinating, and I've been fortunate enough for you to show me around your site, and what it says to me is there's something that you've shown. You've got a fairly large garden, I think it must be said, but there is something for everybody in there. I think that anybody can do it there in their home gardens as well, in smaller places, and making space for wildlife. And that's our big challenge, of course, is making space for wildlife. I would just add, actually, while I'm speaking, that they were not Dorset Wildlife Trust beavers that escaped. I would hasten to add, from our enclosure. There have been 1 or 2 sightings elsewhere in Dorset, but they weren't Dorset Wildlife Trust beavers. Ours have stayed in the enclosure, I would add. So there's a couple of questions come up. A few about mowing and cutting grass, and of course, you know, you can leave meadows for a little while and they look great for a year or 2, but much longer than they do start to decline, of course. And regular cutting of them on a cycle is quite valuable for increasing their diversity, and certainly the diversity of plants within grasslands. And you mentioned the very fine grass. I was going to ask, we are fortunate, in fact, to have a leading grassland expert on here. Jim, I was just going to ask you, what grasses are good for, because obviously ryegrass and things rapidly dominates things, doesn't it? So what the fine grasses that would not outcompete a wildflower meadow? What sort of thing are we looking at there, Jim?
Thanks, Brian. Well, I suspect the fine grass that Julia showed was creeping fescue, which actually is, it is a fine grass and it doesn't grow as tall and robust, but it can form a very dense sward. I think the point you've just made is that grasslands depend on being cut or grazed. They are only with us because we have, over the centuries, cut or grazed them. So to not do that, as you say, in a year or 2, it might look wonderful, but long term, you're building up a real problem because in the first instance, just the coarser grasses will tend to dominate, and long term, you develop more and more fertility. If you think about the traditional meadows, we often hear that awful statistic that 97% of our old hayfields have been lost in the last 50 years or so, which is truly terrible. But the reason they were there, the reason they were so rich, was that over the centuries, they were harvested in high summer. They were cut probably by teams of people with scythes, and it was jolly hard work. But nonetheless, they had to do that in order to provide a stored winter food for the cattle or any livestock. And it was that system, that cutting in high summer when everything was in full flower at maximum growth, that actually provided those wonderful herb-rich fields that we lament the loss of. So it is very difficult for conservationists because we love to see the flowers, but we do also have to think about what was the system that over so long has actually enabled the hayfields and the flowery downlands and so on, constantly grazed, to actually be so flowery. And if you don't do that, I'm afraid in the longer term, even the medium or not very long term, the coarse grasses will take over. So although the fescue, the fine grass, is probably a bit less aggressive than, say, boxfoot or tall oak, the grasses will tend to swamp out the flowers if they're not kept in check. And by cutting and removing the cuttings, or if you have a big garden like Julia, you might even consider grazing, that is taking off the nutrients. And that's what it's the fertility that Julia talked about, which is the enemy really of a diverse sward. So anything you can do to keep the fertility down, not in your vegetable patch perhaps, but certainly in the grassland, That's really what you need to do. Sorry about the lecture. I'll shut up.
No, that was brilliant. I mean, I think it's so useful, and that's part of what I was saying about learning all the time. And you know, the grass has been just a complete nightmare because it was very difficult finding the right thing. I had some people saying, well, you know, we could come along and scythe, but actually, as you've noticed, there's quite a lot of land, and scything was just going to be you know, too lengthy a process. Eventually last year I managed to get a tractor to come along and do that. And I think with the far field, which I've sort of left so far, that the general advice has been, yes, absolutely, that I've got to cut it, and I've got to cut sort of maybe a third each year, so that basically every 3 years that it's cut. And then hopefully that will do both things. It'll keep the rodents and keep the diversity and take away. And we've just got a thing on the back of our little tractor mower thing, which collects the grass. So my husband and I have been running around the garden with it, and we literally it is he goes behind with the controlling the collector and making sure the grass doesn't get too much, and I drive the tractor, and then we, you know, have to stop every other minute. It's quite a labor of love, but it's quite fun if we just do an hour a day, and we're only doing the paths at this moment, so that's quite good.
Brilliant. Couple of questions about your ponds as well. How did you line the ponds, or line them with clay, or?
What happened with the ponds is that we started with just the sort of natural clay and other things that were in there for digging the main pond, but it leaked, and effectively it didn't hold the water, so we actually had to take the water out again, and we imported clay and line them, and now it holds the water really well.
Yeah, getting ponds to hold water can be a problem sometimes.
I would just like to say I've got some clay over, and I'm desperate for somebody who might want some clay, because it's a sort of pile that's sitting in our land, and I'm very keen for someone who might want some. So if anybody's thinking of making a small pond and they want some clay, let me know, and we'll wet it all and get it ready so that you could come and take it away.
Yeah. We might be looking for some for the Kinkham Centre pond, actually. So I'll not mention it to them, Julia. It's not very far away from you.
Please do. I'd love that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that often comes up about wildlife gardening, of course, is some people imagine wildlife gardening just to be letting everything go, but I think for wildlife gardening and for more people to be involved in it, I think what you're demonstrating too is that it can be a bit formal, it can be interesting, it can be varied. It's not just, you know, a patch that you let go, is it?
No, it's not. And I think that's what's so interesting about doing it, because that, you know, you can encourage species in one area, but in another area you want to get rid of the species. And I noticed that somebody was saying something about all the weed that goes in the ponds. And the fascinating thing is that we've got, you know, a number of different ponds, and there's lots of wild parsnip that we perfectly happy for a little bit, but it takes over within seconds. So we're going to have a sort of team of people with waders to sort of pull it out so you can actually see some of the ponds. But we've got the sort of 3 main ponds leading into the things, and the first one gets sort of algae on the top, and I don't know whether that's the, you know, from the water or whatever else, and so I get in the pond and start taking off the algae. The next one along has what I initially thought was just leaves falling from a tree, but it isn't. It's a particular type of weed. Many of you will know, but basically looks like a whole lot of leaves have fallen on the pond, but that is particularly in that pond, and then the pond behind has the wild parsnip. So it's really weird that each of them right next door to each other has a different pest.
Well, water attracts wildlife very quickly, of course, and some of that might be desirable in your pond, and some less so. Someone was asking about duckweed, and you know, duckweed it does cover ponds quite quickly sometimes, and there's no easy way to control it other than a bit of hard work and raking it out, I think, and keeping on top of it. But shading, I think, helps with some of these things as well. You know, if there are shady areas, there will be less of the, you know, things like duckweed. And with algae, of course, things like barley straw, faggots, you know, are quite a good thing to float around the pond, and they will collect algae and keep areas clear.
And but I have to say that when we were getting the algae out of the pond, is that there were always just like on the bottom of them just completely full of the newts. So we picked out the newts before we took out all the algae. So there's a whole range of things, but that in itself is quite a fun thing to do, particularly on a day like this.
Indeed. And inevitably, one of the issues always comes up when we talk about ragwort, of course. There is a massive split on people's thoughts on ragwort. It is important for quite a number of insect species, of course, and a couple of species for which it's the sole food plant. But I think, as with our nature reserves, it is a balance with ragwort. I think that you do need to, there is a legal obligation sometimes to control it in certain areas if it's likely to spread to other land. But it is great for wildlife, good for lots of things. And likewise, your thistles, Julia. Thistles are absolutely amazing for pollinators. And at Wild Woodbury, we had a lot of spear thistle coming through in the first year after after stopping agricultural inputs and grazing on some areas. But those fields were absolutely alive with pollinators, and later alive with birds, goldfinches and things feeding on thistles. So hugely valuable for lots of species of wildlife, actually, thistles. And
that's absolutely true. And we've got masses of thistles. It's the things. It's just not having them completely taking over everywhere. So I think that's just part of trying to get the balance and things. But that's one of the things, Jim, that's probably interesting to get your view on, is that we're talking about the birds in the winter. I actually left our wildflower meadow. So the one that we stripped the topsoil off, so that really was all the wildflowers in it. I left that without taking the stuff on it until probably March or April. But over winter, it was flocks of birds were going in there, because there was really very little of that type of environment that was there. And that's part of the challenge. You'll say, on the one hand, one's told to sort of clear it off and get the animals to graze things and everything else. And then on the other hand, you can see that, a lot of the wildlife really love it if you don't.
Yes, you're absolutely right, Julia. And I think the difference, as you say, was that the bit which had so many flowers, and therefore in the winter lots of seed heads, was where you'd actually strip the soil and you sowed an annual or a short-term crop of flowers. I leave it on the herbaceous borders, which is mostly sort of garden plants, but wildlife-friendly garden plants, single flowers, lots of flowering, lots of seed produced. And just as you say, in the winter especially, goldfinches and greenfinches coming to feed on those winter stems. And it also protects the core of the plants from excessive frost. So leaving those dead stems in the winter is a good idea. I think the difference probably with the, if you like, the purer grassland, especially where it's fertile, you probably won't have that many flowers in it anyway. So there's not going to be that much amount of sort of winter resource there. What I was going to also say, it will be interesting if you keep on more or less the same paths, and I know you say you divert to go around a particular plant so it doesn't get mown off in flower, but if you keep on mainly the general same route, it will be interesting to see over time, as your grassland develops, what the sort of herb content of the mown paths is compared with the unmown stuff. There may or may not be a difference, but I wouldn't mind betting that in your short grass, you'll get a different range of things like clovers and self-heal, shorter plants that will actually live between the mowings, as opposed to the tall grass stuff, which, like your pictures show, is full of things like oxeye daisy and tall herbs. It will be interesting to see if there's that.
No, that is already happening, because I've got some areas where I've mown much more continuously, and they've got those low-lying plants, and that's where the finer grasses are particularly coming through, and moss, which I also absolutely love. So I know that a bit of mowing in there is good. So I'm not ignoring the mowing. It's just that much less than I ever did before.
Excellent. And as with many wildlife management, diversity of input creates diversity, doesn't it? So it's a good thing to do. A few comments on peat, of course, and peat is I think is the biggie that we do need to change very soon. The government is talking about banning peat for a long time, and they've had years to do it, and they've now announced it, but it's a couple of years away still. So I think there's an action there we can all take by not buying peat-based composts, and that does make a massive difference. Our peat bogs and peatlands around the country are under massive threat. So I think instant action for everybody, I think, is not to use peat. As we heard, those of you on our last talk, which was actually about peat and soils. So just checking for any more questions to come in. If not, thank you so much, Julia, and encourage everybody to come and have a wander around your garden with you. It's absolutely fascinating.
Yes, come to the Wildling weekend.
Yeah, so the Wildling weekend.
Oh,
So, juliahailes.com, and you'll see lots of you'll get the details there, and you're about to update those. So with all the timings and everything, Julia, I believe, is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
So yeah, so if you've got time, do head over to Julia's place and have a look round. You won't be disappointed, I can assure you. So thank you all for coming, and it's still some nice sunny evening to enjoy, I think, yet. So I hope to see you.
Thank you, Jim, as well.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. And yeah, so look forward to seeing you all again at our next talk. Do we know what that is yet, Esther? Oh, you're muted.
I am. I'm not anymore. It's going to be on marine.
Right. Have we got a date yet or not?
Marine talk. It's July, not quite fixed yet, but we will keep you posted.
Brilliant. Well, thank you all, and again, and thank you all for your ongoing support for the Wildlife Trust. Yeah, we couldn't. Yeah, membership is hugely valuable for the Wildlife Trust. You support everything we do, and we couldn't do a half or third or any of what we do without member support. So thank you all again, and see you all soon, I hope.
Okay. Goodbye. Thank you.
Cheerio.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.